Hi, welcome to Excel for Educators, Episode 9. My name is Alicia Parker, and I'll be your host. In this video, I'll be continuing our discussion of using pivot tables. I'll be doing this on a Windows 10 computer using Excel 2016. If you're on a different operating system or a slightly older version of Excel, much of this should look the same for you. Let's get started. In Episode 8, we covered the basics of creating a pivot table and how to place data fields in one of the four main boxes in the pivot table design fields. We created this basic pivot table that organizes the number of student scores in each state test score possibility by teacher name. We also looked at adding a layer to the rows or columns with the grade level data element. You can create a list of teachers by grade, like this, or grade by teacher, like this. Or you can break out the number of students in each test score by grade, like this. Or display the data first by grade level and then by test score in the column structure, like this. But to continue our discussion of pivot tables, let's return to the simple structure of teacher, state test score, and count. In Episode 8, we discovered how to change the sum to count so we had an accurate count of student scores. There are several more useful formulas that can be applied to pivot tables in the values field settings. Typically, when I'm analyzing data related to schools or school districts, I am pivoting data that I either need to count or sum. I don't usually need the averages or the maximum or the minimum or any of these other calculations. They may be useful in other situations, but I find that when working with educational data, I'm more likely to use a formula to accomplish these kinds of calculations than I am to do so in a pivot table. What I do find useful is the tab here that is labeled Show Values As. In our current view, we can see the count of students in each state test score by teacher. Many times, I want to see this as a percentage of the teacher's row. So even though it might be useful to know that Appleby has 33 level 1s, I might be interested in knowing what percent of his students scored at level 1. And it's a simple calculation. I just need to divide 33 by the total students who had Appleby, which is 196. But that is not a simple task if I want to do that for every teacher and every score. An easy fix is to change my Show Values As tab. There's a drop-down here that defaults to no calculation. But if I change this to percent of row total, Excel will calculate each of these numbers as percents based on the row total. As you can see, all the values turned into percents based on the row total. Notice that the grand total for each row is 100%. And we can verify that by highlighting the percents in one of these rows and then checking down on the bottom ribbon of Excel where the sum equals 100%. Sometimes when you're first learning how to apply calculations, it's easy to make mistakes and do a percent of the column total. Let's take a look at our outcome if we accidentally do that and see if we can figure out some clues that this is incorrect. So I'll change Show Values As from percent of row total to percent of column total and click OK. See how the grand total for the row is no longer 100%? Now for the first teacher, Appleby, it's 4.65%. What do you think that means? If we were face-to-face, I'd use some teacher wait time while you think about that. But this is a pre-recorded video, and a long pause could be awkward, disconcerting, or incorrectly assumed to be a video error. So rather than wait for you to answer, I'll just give you the answer. The 4.65% is the percent of Applebee's students compared to the whole school. He has 4.65% of all the students in this data set. If I look down to the column totals, I can see that at the column level, the grand total is 100%. This is my first clue that I'm calculating this by column totals, not row totals. The second clue is that the percents for Applebee are way too small to be only calculating this from a row of data. And the third clue is that the percents in the row do not add up to 100%. Added together, you can see that this gives 23.17%. Now, this view could be useful. If you wanted to look at which teacher had the lowest or highest percentages of level 1s or level 3s or 5s or any column, you could. It's easy to highlight this first row of percents of level 1 and again look to the bottom for who has the largest percent. The maximum value is 6.37. And so we can see that that is Mrs. Ridenauer. She has the largest percent overall of level 1s. We can also see the minimum is 3.58, which is Mrs. Meal. So this view can be useful, but it's important that you carefully select the percent calculation that you want. So let's go back to the original view and display the values as percentages of each row. One thing I want to show you is how I often take these values and copy and paste them into other tabs or even other workbooks for use later. If you copy and paste this entire table, you can do it in a way to eliminate the underlying pivot table and just paste in the values. This makes it easier to share and to work with the results of your pivot table. So for this view, I'm just going to copy this entire table, which I can either do by right-click and copy, or you can use your keyboard shortcut of Control-C. Then I'll open up a new tab by clicking on this plus. And this time, rather than using the keyboard shortcut of Control-V, I'm going to right-click. Notice that there's several different paste options. The first paste option will paste everything, including all the formatting for the pivot table. And the second will just paste values. And I won't be pasting in the underlying code that creates the pivot table. So let's take a look at both outcomes for comparison. Here's what it looks like if I just hit paste. And here's what it looks like if I choose paste values. If I put my cursor in this first table, you can see that the pivot table field list pops up on the right. All the percentages look like percent values, and I can still manipulate it by adding something like grade level to the rows. But the other table is now a static table that isn't affected by my changes to the original pivot fields. Notice that the values are displayed as decimals, and nothing changed when I added grade level to the pivot table fields on the right. I can easily change these numbers to percentages by highlighting all the values that are percents, and in the Home tab and the Number section, I can click on the percent sign. If I want a decimal or two, I can choose to add those in by choosing the Increase Decimal field. If I want to see the table with numbers next to the table with percents, I could easily go back to my original pivot table and change it back to numbers. We'll go back to Value, Field Settings, and click on Show Values As, and change it from percent row total to no calculation, and click OK, which is Mrs. Then again, I can copy this table and go to my new sheet or maybe a new workbook, and I can paste those side by side and use paste values. Now I can see both my numbers and my percents. So I would encourage you to practice some pivot tables. And then tune in for episode 10, where I'll continue with pivot tables and give some more advanced tips and tricks for formatting pivot tables and manipulating the rows and columns around. We'll also talk about using filters within your pivot tables. I hope this video on pivot tables has been helpful. Check out my additional Excel for Educator videos for more help on using Excel. And until next time, this is Alicia Parker with Excel for Educators.